Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Colosimo, principal of Juan Diego Catholic High School. I am joined today by our assistant principal, Mr. Dave Bernetti. Welcome, Mr. Bernetti.
Thank you.
What are we here for? What are we going to talk about?
We're here to talk about a good friend of the Skaggs Catholic Center, Monsignor Fitzgerald.
And he passed away on January 15, 2027.
That's
2026.
correct. 89 years old.
He was 89 years old. Yeah. So for those of you who know Monsignor or maybe don't know him, he was really a critical figure in the history of the Catholic Diocese of Salt Lake City, and he was an absolutely important and fundamental person in the development of the Skaggs Catholic Center. Mr. Bernetti, what do you remember about what strikes you or what comes out at you when you start thinking about Monsignor Fitzgerald?
I mean, there's so many memories. I think one of the things that strikes me is that 26 years ago, when you and Monsignor Fitzgerald invited me to come back to help plan a dedication, he was just like this force. He knew exactly what needed to happen, but he was kind and very clear through the whole thing. And I remember he just gave the best advice ever. I remember he said that whatever you plan, whatever you do with the traditions of the school, you need to make sure it lasts 25 years. And I thought it was like, oh, well, that's really funny. 25 years, who cares? And it's funny, he and I had a visit a few months ago, and we were laughing about how quickly 25 years has gone. But his wisdom, his sharpness, and his directness, I always appreciated that about him. And his laugh, I loved his chuckle.
Yeah, he kind of had that hysterical laugh.
Oh, he had a funny,
distinct to Fitz.
Just breathe in, kind of, he would get going, and it'd be really break you up. Yeah.
So it was kind of a bookend experience for you, in a sense that you were part of the opening of the school 26 years ago, and then last year when we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Skaggs Catholic Center, you got involved with him in the book that we published.
The book, yeah.
So
it was so
say
great.
A little bit about that.
We didn't know exactly what we were doing with the book. We kind of had an idea, and it took on a life of its own. I'd go up to see Fitz, and I'd have this stack of the latest version draft of the pages, and I'd drop them off, and I'd say, Monsignor, could you please look at this and make sure it'd be accurate? And most people would just kind of glance through it, and he'd call me the next morning at 7 a.m. Dave, I'm ready to see you. Can you come up at 9 o'clock? And I'd go up, and he would have gone through every single page. And so we had 3 or 4 different versions of that where we sat for a couple of hours, and he would go through and point out all of the changes he had made, and then we'd tell stories and laugh. I'm so grateful that I had that time with him. It was a lot of fun, but the stuff he remembered about the diocese and the Sisters of the Holy Cross and just all kinds of details. So he was sharp as a tack.
One of the distinctive things about the Skaggs Catholic Center, and we can kind of just see it where we're sitting, is the artwork.
Yeah.
That is adorned around the Skaggs Catholic Center. Why do you think he was so devoted to this idea that you had to have a substantial amount of Catholic iconography inside of a school building, a Catholic school building?
Well, my sense is, and you probably have actually a better recall of this, but my sense is he had a belief that when you are learning in a space that's filled with beautiful things and beauty surrounds you, it inspires your mind, it inspires parts of you to learn. Plus, we don't just have random art, we have this beautiful Catholic iconography, and I think he really wanted to make sure people knew that they were walking into a Catholic institution. There's a lot of original Catholic art here that really makes us unique.
Yeah,
so
there's that saying that was the foundation of the book that we ended up producing last year. The saying is, beauty is the pathway to God.
To God.
And that was a big I don't know if it was his saying or not, but it was certainly his philosophy that you would surround students in this beautiful environment that was adorned with all kinds of Catholic iconography.
My relationship with Monsignor Fitzgerald pales in relationship to the history you have with him. So when you think of Monsignor, what are you going to miss? What do you think of?
I think for me, he was foundational in my life. My involvement with him began 30 years ago, and he and I were put together to work on a dream, the project that became the Skaggs Catholic Center. And it really started before we had money, before we had land, before we had an architect or a contractor. Of course, the big step in this whole thing was when we were able to get Mr. Skaggs to be our benefactor to fund it. And one of the first things that we were asked to do is travel all over the country, visiting new schools, Catholic schools, charter schools, public schools, to try to get an idea of what the most modern looks were in a Catholic school. And so I really got to know him well with travel. I bet you we visited 100 schools in a year and a half. And
wow.
So a lot of time in airports and on planes, and it really helped to form me in terms of my philosophy of education, my philosophy of, Catholic life, just my philosophy of how to live your life. And so I think I was very well treated to being mentored by a really unique man that had a perspective on life that is not shared by a lot of people. That his view of just compassion. Before I was influenced by him, I really did not pay attention to what you might call the little people, like whether it was a waiter, in a restaurant, or whether it was a bellhop in a hotel, or somebody taking your ticket at an airport. To me, these were just functionary people that I would just not really interact with.
Sure.
And what he taught me, and at first it kind of annoyed me, but then later I got used to it and then really became appreciative of it, is that he would never stop and bypass a moment to connect with the lowest of lowest people that you might consider low. He would raise them up and treat them with an unbelievable amount of compassion that it really had a lasting impact on me. That, there's this waiter who's bringing your food, and yeah, you can give him a good tip, which, okay, that's you're obligated to do, but what Monsignor would do is he would actually get to know the waiter. And so in the course of a 45-minute lunch, he would make this waiter his best friend. And it got to the point like we would go back to these restaurants over and over and over because he was a man of routine, and these people would just become his best friends. And then it led to all kinds of help that he was required to do, like they were getting a divorce, they didn't have money, or that they needed to help with fixing their car, or that their child got in trouble with the law. And so he started off by being their friend, but then he would actually engage in significant things that these people needed to kind of move their life along. And it's like, that's basically what Christ taught. It's like there was Jesus in action, modern day priest, that, you don't have to be the hero up on the ambo that's given the Christmas Eve homily, that, Christ is found just in how you interact with the littlest of little people. And, that was the most lasting impression I had of him, and I've tried to emulate that. So he really taught me a lot. That's just a simple thing, but man, it was so profound that what he was really doing is being Christ in everyday life, and it was just a practical example of how you can do that.
It's so true.
The other side of it, what I say oftentimes is that the first 100 years of our diocese were really dominated by our first bishop, Lawrence Scanlon. And Bishop Scanlon was a towering man. He was 6'7" tall, and he was the bishop at a time when he would go visit parishes in outlying areas on horseback.
Right.
I mean, he wouldn't get in a car, or he wouldn't get on a train, so it was really a rugged, wild, wild west of Utah that he was the first bishop of. And of course, Bishop Scanlon's known for building the cathedral and establishing the first Catholic schools and establishing the first hospital, and he really got this diocese up and running. And I would say the first 100 years of our history of our diocese is dominated by Bishop Lawrence Scanlon. And what you would have to say is that the second 100 years, beginning in around 1980 until we get to 2080, will be dominated by, he wasn't a bishop, will be dominated by Monsignor Fitzgerald. And you say, well, why is that so? And it's because he was a visionary, he was a pragmatist, he knew to buy land for future schools and future churches when people would just scoff at him. Like, he bought a big chunk of land that now became Daybreak. And then he bought land west of Utah Lake. So he had that kind of vision. He had vision about the finances of the diocese. He had, of course, a soft spot in his heart for Catholic education. And he not only helped obviously establish the schools of the Skaggs Catholic Center, but all 16 schools in the diocese have been benefited by his work and his relationship with the Skaggs family. There isn't a single school, or really you can almost say not a single Catholic institution in Utah that has not been touched by the work of Monsignor Fitzgerald and the way he was able to be an administrator and a fundraiser. I mean, you talk about our missions. we've established missions all over the state of Utah that people don't even know about, but they're little small churches in these very, very small towns that have actually a very large Hispanic Catholic population that need to be ministered to. And the reason that that's possible is because, number one, he understood it. Number two, he went out and got the money to build the smallest of small churches.
Right.
You know, we Juan Diego helped establish the mission in central Utah that's called Juan Diego Catholic Parish. You know, and of course, when it came time for him to establish that parish, he calls us and says, okay, you know, a lot's been done for Juan Diego Catholic High School. It's time for Juan Diego Catholic High School to do right. And so we raised the money to put in the pews, and we raised the money for the altar and for some like statue of Juan Diego, and there it is. You know, still to this day, it's serving, you know, thousands of immigrant Hispanic, you know, first-generation people that are working in the fields of central Utah. And so that's who this person was, and his capacity to administrate and to have the vision to see all that was necessary. And so really and truly what you'll say is that the second 100 years at least, and maybe more, will have been dominated by Monsignor Fitzgerald in the same way that the first 100 years were dominated by Lawrence Scanlon.
So true.
You know.
His last visit here, he came with, he was retired, he came with Monsignor Birkenshaw. They didn't tell us they were coming. And I get a call from the front office, and there's Monsignor Fitzgerald's here, Monsignor Fitzgerald. So I go out, and they're here, and he says, and he was so humble. He goes, Dave, he wanted to see a glimpse of the new construction. And it was really, really difficult for him to make his way all the way down there. And we got him down there, he took his time, and the best place to look at it at the time was from inside the weight room. So we got in the weight room, and we had to lift him up onto a box because of the way the windows were situated. And I think he was a little embarrassed by that, but some students came in and he dropped everything. He just couldn't wait to talk to those 3 or 4 kids that came in. He wanted to know their names and where they were going to school and where did they come from and how long had they been at Juan Diego. And he was just like on cloud 9. And Monsignor Birkenshaw and I just kind of stepped back and let him have as much time as he wanted with those kids, but he just seemed to enjoy it so much because it had been an awful long time since he'd been here in the building with us. So
I think what's also true is that if you were engaged for any length of time with Monsignor Fitzgerald in the work of the diocese, that you were not immune to basically getting chewed out.
Oh, totally.
Right? So like we all have these, you know, maybe that's part of the fun of it is that we want to think of him as this glorious, you know, saint from heaven that was all knowing and all loving, and he was all those things, but he was also very good at like really chewing you out, you know. And
oh, totally.
Almost anyone who's ever worked with him for any length of time will tell you a story about, boy, was I in trouble, you know.
Yeah.
I got in so much trouble. You know, and,
it's so true.
So it's just, he had this habit of, he'd say, okay, I'm going to be gone for a week and I'll be back on Friday, May 3rd. So the entire staff at the pastoral session would expect him on Friday, May 3rd. But really, he was coming back on Wednesday, May 1st. And so it's like, you know, the old saying, when the cat's away, the mice will play. So he would have this habit of making it known that to everybody, I'll be back here on Friday, May 3rd. And a lot of people never caught on, but like, there he is showing up on Wednesday and Thursday before and finding people not doing their job because the cat was away and they really didn't have to be all hands on deck until Friday, May 3rd. And so, you know, he did that a few times, and, you know, after a while, people are like, well, we don't know when he's coming back, but we're not going to let down on the job because, and so that's all part of his, it was part of his psychology as an administrator, you know, and, you know, you had to kind of think about why he did that, you know, and there was a method to that madness, but boy, it caught a lot of people by surprise. And of course, they got chewed out by it, and then they didn't do it anymore.
That's
then
true.
They knew, well, I've got to put in a good 40 hours worth of work, whether the cat's here looking over us or not, you know. Sometimes it's just really hard to know, but it's really not hard to know with Fitzgerald because you can see it certainly in everything he built. Like you could say he was a builder, but then you see it in the non-tangible assets that he brought to the diocese, and that's in the helping of the formation, the faith and administrative formation of people who could then go on without him and help to implement the building of the Catholic Church in Utah, even though he's no longer with us.
Yeah. You talked about the whole chewing out thing, and I mean, I cherish those moments now. I've been on the receiving end of that a few times, and sometimes it could be the simplest thing. You'd say, Fitz, I think we should do, or we're going to do this, this, or this, or that, and he'd go, no, that's not what you're going to do. This is what you're going to do. It's like, okay, you know, there was always a real clear directive and stuff. You knew exactly where you stood all times.
Yeah. When we hired the architects, MHTN, to design this school 30 years ago, they could do all the school part of it, but they were so psyched out by the chapel, because they were coming at it from a Mormon mindset of, we're going to, like, we can't build a ward, but we really don't know how to build a church. And so what they kept coming back to were these designs that, you know, it was like St. Peter's Basilica. And he just kept shaking his head. And finally, he sat down in front of the architect and said, give me a piece of paper. And so he took the piece of paper and he says, here, this is what you do. I want you to put a wall here. Then we need a door that goes into the sacristy, and we're going to put a baptismal font here and over here. And he just literally drew the whole thing for him, and they were looking at him in amazement that he could architecturally put together a chapel. Well, like for him, it was like he'd been in chapels all of his life, but for them, they'd never been in a chapel.
Right.
And he just got so, he was patient with him for a while, but finally he just chewed him out and said, I'll teach you how to draw this thing, and this is how we're going to do it, you know. And it's like, boom, I remember that just so clearly, you know. And they were like chewed out, and they were like, okay. And if you go look at our chapel today, that's exactly what he drew.
Totally.
You know, and it's like they were grateful because they were never going to get it right. You know, we were either going to get some monstrosity or we were going to get a Mormon ward, and neither one was really appropriate. You know, it's just a chapel. It wasn't, you know, the crowning achievement of the Skaggs Catholic Center. It was just a, you know, it was just a chapel.
Yeah,
you know?
so true.
It was really good
So
that
true.
way. And,
he will be greatly missed. I know he's a good friend. You'll miss him.
yeah.
I'll miss him. A lot of people will miss his presence.
No doubt. I think that's the end of our conversation, is just to say the second century of the Catholic Diocese of Salt Lake City is really the story of Monsignor Fitzgerald.
Excellent.
And he was born in 1936 and he died in 2026, 89 years old, and he'll be greatly missed. And I want to thank everybody for listening, if you did listen, and thanks very much, Dave.
You bet.
Yeah.
You bet.